Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to another episode of What's on the Playlist Today. What's on the playlist today is the album Freak Out by Frank Zappa and Mothers of Invention, an image of which you will see here. Um, Frank Zappa is somewhat of a controversial artist in the music industry, mostly because his music is very weird. And he can be very vulgar, but mostly because he's weird. um, the when the original band, which I don't recall the band's name, Frank Zappa joined them, and instead of playing covers of other people's music, convinced him to play his own original material. The artist or the agent who signed them to MGM Records and got this to record this album was under the impression they were a white blues band, rhythm and blues band. And when he heard the recordings for the second track, which is the second track they recorded was "Who Are the Brain Police," third song on the album. But when he heard that, he realized this is not a blues, this is not a white blues band. Frank Zappa, that is his real name. Apparently, Zappa is a Greek name. I did not know that until I looked it up. This is considered to be one of the first concept albums in rock and roll. It is one of the earliest double albums in rock and roll, and it is, I think, the first debut album that was a double album. There were two vinyl, no band debuted with a two album disc set. It was not critically well received. It reached like 130 on the pop charts, but it was not a huge critical success, but it did get a huge cult following and was more successful after it, as time rolled on. Because of being an early concept album in the rock and roll, it's been regarded as one of the more influential albums in music history, in rock history at least. The music itself is actually a mix of popular music at the time, some 50s doo-wops, improvisational stuff, avant-garde, performance pieces. So it's really a blend of styles here, but all done with Frank Zappa's unique twist on it. Whether you like Frank Zappa or not, he is a very talented individual. He is an excellent guitar player. He is an excellent composer, but he is very weird. He definitely puts his own take on things. He considered himself a satirist, someone who poked fun at American society, and definitely, his albums do reflect that. Most of the lyrical content is basically a critique of American suburban life and the hippie freak culture, which a lot of people find unusual because he does look a lot like a hippie. But he really didn't like them all that much, in spite of the fact that they were his biggest fans. He just thought they were kind of, undirected, pathetic losers, really. Which is kind of a shame because they're the ones who bought all his records. I was introduced to Frank Zappa at a very young age. My parents liked him, being hippies who loved weird stuff. They, of course, introduced me to weird, fun stuff. I don't think this was the album that I was really introduced to, but I do tend to, when I do this stuff, go to the early albums. I like to just debut my playlist thing with the band's first album. This is it. This is Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention's first album, and it is weird. Is there anything I actually got any radio play? Not really. Yeah, none of. I think I've heard who are the Brain Police on WBLM a few times, but when I was a kid, the big radio station in the state was WBLM, and they had a trailer in the town of Lewiston, which is where their broadcast tower was, and they would get high and call for pizza, and play music. So they played anything. That was before they actually were big and successful. When they actually I'm not going to talk about BLM. But they used to play whatever they wanted to. And that was probably the only place I ever heard Frank Zappa music on the radio, was the local radio station. I think my parents only had one album, and I don't think it was this one. But that, but because the local radio station would play them, I would get to hear some of this stuff. But yeah, this is a weird mix. Like Hungry Freaks Daddy is definitely a critique of hippie culture, but I Ain't Got No Heart, Wowie Zowie, You Didn't Try to Call Me Any Way the Wind Blows. Those are all like 50s doo-wop stuff. But then you've got the Brain Police, Help I'm a Rock, the Return of the Son of the Monster Magnet, which is a 12-minute long instrumental piece with some improvisational crap thrown in there. I think that's what drew me to Frank Zappa's music initially. His music itself is weird, and so are his lyrics, but lyrically he tends to kind of be bizarre and silly and absurd, and I've always liked that. That always kind of attracted me to it. I don't know if this would actually appeal to anyone but someone like me. As far as Frank Zappa's albums, could I recommend this? As much as I do enjoy this. It's not my favorite album of his, but I do enjoy it. Would I recommend it? It's an early example of his work. Not quite as polished as some of his later stuff. It's not necessarily showing his genius, as it were. But it has some cultural significance. Frank Zappa did influence a lot of people. Not necessarily with this album. Some of his later albums were more influential on the popular rock and rollers of the 60s and 70s. But this is where it started. I think this is more accessible than some of his later stuff, though, because he does have, for his earlier stuff, was more influenced, still of his childhood influences of 50s style music, still shows up in here in a couple of his albums. There's a bit less of his really bizarre stuff on this. So this, if you want to try out Frank Zappa, I think this would be a good place to start, because it is less bizarre and outlandish and crude and vulgar as his later stuff. This is pretty tame for Frank Zappa. So if you're interested, you could start here. Just give it a listen, see what you think. His stuff is not for everybody. My wife hates it. My kids aren't that fond of it either. That's not saying anything. I don't know many people who like Frank Zappa as much as I do. Certainly my parents did. Some of their friends did, and some of them did not. Frank Zappa, as an individual, he was a character. I've watched TV interviews with him. I mean, he passed in 1993. But, I remember growing up watching interviews with him, and he was intelligent, but he was a character, man. He just did not care what people thought and said whatever he felt. And sometimes that was not a good thing. He had some opinions. But yeah, I think if you want to get into Frank Zappa, I would recommend starting here, seeing what you think of it. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. If you look up, how the album was made, there's some conflicting stories about, how, one person says the guy in the recording booth thought it was so awesome, he called his boss and gave him an unlimited blank check to do as much weird stuff as he wanted. And there's another side of the story that says, no, he scrambled frantically to try and convince his boss to let him finish making the album. So, a lot going on behind the scenes with Frank Zappa and this album for his debut album. But there we have it. I've said my opinions. I've said my piece. Take from that what you will. As always, thanks for watching. If you like this rambling crap, I don't know what to tell you. I have other crap you can watch. It's all crap. And until next time, good hunting.